Welcome back to another episode of Warren Cali. In this episode, I'm going to detail the story of Colton, Simpson. Colton was born in 1965 in Los Angeles, California. Colton would have a chaotic childhood. His mom and dad had a toxic relationship, always fighting and arguing in front of him and his other siblings. Colton's mother was a nurse, and his father was Major League Baseball player Dick Simpson. Both of his parents always convinced Colton and his siblings that the other one was the bad parent and were the reason why they separated. Colton's mother would later get a new boyfriend, and Colton would endure a lot with his mother's new relationship. Colton's mother boyfriend would beat her, him, and also his siblings. Colton's mother would even take out her frustrations on her kids and beat them as well. That's a hard life for any child to go through, and Colton was just 8, experiencing all this. Not to mention, his father stopped coming around. Colton's mother took her frustrations with her kids to another level one day. She dropped them off in a random neighborhood, leaving them to fend for themselves. This led to Colton's grandmother Louise taking Colton and his siblings in for good. His grandmother Louise lived on 2nd Avenue in a Rollin Crips turf, a gang who would start to build a name for themselves in the 70s. Colton's grandmother Louise was a religious woman. She raised 6 kids, including his mother. She tried to lead everyone down the right path in life, and she would try to do the same with Colton and his siblings. Colton was attracted to the streets early on. Around 9 years old, he began hanging around his neighborhood. He'd be shooting dice and hanging with older kids. He would eventually meet Smiley, a young Crip 4 years older than him. Smiley would introduce him to the streets in another way. He taught Colton how to steal cars and introduced him to smoking weed. And even at the young age of 10, he would co-sign Colton to get put on the Rollin Crips. Colton's initiation into the 30s wasn't easy. They made him run down the alley and shot at him to make sure he wasn't a coward. Then they would have him fight 3 members at once to test his fighting skills. Colton would go on his first mission the same day. He would have his first mission against the Inglewood family Bloods, leading to multiple Bloods being shot. That day, he would gain the name Little C. Colton's grandmother wanted him to stay off the streets, and instead of sending him to schools in close proximity, like middle schools like Audubon or Fauché, which were in Gang's turf, she sent him to a school in a nicer area called Orville Wright, which was in Westchester. But in South Central, Colton, who went by many names now, like Little C, CeeLo, and Crazy Colton. He was locked in a war with multiple blood sets, like BPS and a Rollin 20 Bloods, 2 gangs in close proximity. After an incident with a Blood that led to Colton getting a concussion, he plotted to kill Bloods and go on a mission, which he would shoot several Bloods and was arrested a week later. Colton was sent to juvenile hall, but Colton would later be released with no witnesses and no one willing to testify. By 1979, at the age of 14, Colton was a full-blown soldier. He was frontline in the war against the Bloods and was putting in work, shooting, and fighting for his set. He was a part of several robberies and even sold weed, but robberies led to him being arrested and serving 6 months in camp, where he would fight rivals and become even more vicious and aggressive. After his release from camp, Colton's gang war with the Bloods, especially BPS in the 20s, was at an all-time high. Bodies were dropping on both sides, leading to numerous deaths of Crips and Bloods. Colton was shooting at Bloods and was even having shootouts with big names in the streets on the opposite side, some being Bloods like Santa Claus. Outside of the gang wars going on in the streets, even at the young age of 14, Colton was involved in a lot of heavy stuff. He was affiliated with Ice-T and his robbery crew. Colton was hitting jewelry stores even at a young age. His first jewelry lick, he hit for $25,000. At the young age of 15, Colton was doing more robberies, but one would get him arrested and sentenced to 7 years in youth authority. In jail, Colton fought numerous Bloods, and on the streets, his gang was deep in war, losing multiple members and taking multiple lives. After 3 years, Colton paroled early. He hit the streets again at 18. Colton would see the streets changed a lot, and crack took over his community. Many of his homies were selling drugs, and some became addicts. It was a lot going on in the 30s community. Some of his homies were being killed, going to jail for murders of rivals, and also robberies. After a short time on the streets, Colton got arrested again on a robbery charge. He would go to county jail and would go to the notorious Crip dorm, known as 4800. In county jail, Colton would experience a lot. He got into numerous fights, seen a lot of people get stabbed and beat, and also, he would jump at court and knocked unconscious by the Bloods. Colton's robbery charge would get him sentenced to 16 months, which he would get sent to Chino State Prison, which was a war zone. He endured riots, fights, and several altercations, as well as being switched to multiple prisons before his release. After his release from prison, Colton got back to business, robbing jewelry stores and sliding on his enemies, but his life of crime would catch back up to him, leading to Colton being charged with 2 counts of robbery, 4 counts of assault with a deadly weapon, and attempted murder. During Colton's new stint in county jail, Colton endured gang fights with the 30s allies, the 60s, with them fighting against the A-Trade gangsters and the Hoovers. Colton formed a good relationship with Rollin 60 Crips like Kody and Big U. Colton would even be jumped by his own gang over a disagreement. He was battling a lot in jail, and the 60s had his back, but he was later sentenced to 24 years for the crimes he committed. While in prison, Colton went through several riots between blacks and Mexicans and blacks and whites. He even faced attempts on his life from Bloods, so this required Colton to put in a lot of work and stab a lot of people. Colton started to separate himself from the gang lifestyle after a while and started reading books about Malcolm X, George Jackson, and several others. He gained a new perspective about violence and people of his race. He started to think about all the things he was doing and seeing that as being a black man, he should stop gangbanging. Colton served time in 5 different prisons and served 12 years before he was released at age 32 in 1998. After his release, Colton connected back with Ice-T, and by this time, Ice-T was a full-blown star, having successful albums and even becoming a star actor. Ice-T would give Colton a job working for him as an assistant. Working for Ice-T gave Colton motivation and the game he needed. He would then pursue his own career and try to make a record label. But when things were going good, Colton would be accused of murder and be arrested in 2000. He would spend 2 years in jail fighting his case until he was released in 2002. But once again, the story of Colton would end in jail. In 2003, Colton was accused of part of being a jewelry store robbery, which he claimed he took no part in, but rental documents linked him to the getaway car used in the robbery. Colton was identified as the driver by 2 police officers who had pursued the car, and he was arrested 2 days later. Colton would make bail and work on a book that he would drop in 2005 called Inside the Crips, which he would detail his life from his troubled upbringing, from joining the Rollin 30 Crips, to his battle in the streets, and also prison. By 2007, Colton was found guilty, and with this case being his 3rd strike, he will receive life. Now Colton is 58 years old and currently in Corcoran State Prison. Colton's earliest parole date is 2029. Now Colton's story is crazy. Just like Monster Kody, he detailed his crazy experience through a book, which showed many angles and decisions, and what the streets led to for him, and how toxic the streets are for anyone who decides to get involved in the gang lifestyle. Colton spent 30 plus years in prison, more than half his life. Colton still pleads his innocence and hopes one day he gets released. This will conclude this episode. If you haven't already, check out my previous episodes. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.